I believe India is the most depressed country in the world right now.
Really? India is the most depressed country in the world.
Parents today focus on intellect, education, math, science,
Grades.
and so focused on educating the brain that we forget to educate their hearts. For example, an extremely hyperactive kid could actually have an ADHD. A kid who just suddenly has school refusal could actually be severely traumatized or bullied or even sexually harassed in school or college. We may feel a kid is just withdrawn and an introvert, but he could be suffering from an actual anxiety disorder. Most, if not all, mental health illnesses start through childhood.
Dr. Zirak is India's leading child and youth psychiatrist. He also runs Empower, one of India's top mental health centers. And what he sees every day inside his clinic should concern every parent.
As we speak, there is one death by suicide every 40 seconds. Unfortunately, the suicide cases are scarily becoming younger and younger.
So how would we teach our children to make the heart nicer and to make the heart stronger?
The two biggest pillars of resilience, even from scientific aspects, is...
Let's just pause for a moment. Now, some people like quick answers, while some people like to think deeply. If you're in the second group, the secret sauce is made for you. So please hit subscribe. So, Zirak, or Dr. Zirak, when I was in school, no one knew what a panic attack was. I didn't know what a panic attack was. Today, I don't think that any teenager who doesn't know what a panic attack is or hasn't experienced it or knows someone who experienced it. So, are all these mental issues on the rise, or is it just that people are more aware of these problems now?
So I think it's both, because I think the incidence of mental health issues or disorders are on the rise, and at the same time there's more awareness. So I think a lot of the youth, because that's the focus for today, is or has the right vocabulary and the tools to understand exactly what's happening to them. And that's with various factors, right? There's more awareness, you have the digital era, there's more social media, there's lots more inquisitiveness into this spectrum of mental health. So I think it's an amalgamation of both. And I know many people ask, why is there a rise, or is there a rise for any specific reason? And I don't think there's only one or two or three reasons. It's an amalgamation of so many factors that contribute towards the rise in mental health in youth.
And when you say there's so many factors, what would you say are the top factors that have contributed to this?
So I think we are living in an age of instant gratification, low frustration tolerances to life, very easily stressed out youth. And I think with that comes poor or unhealthy coping mechanisms. So that's one aspect. The other aspect of why youth is so vulnerable is also because I truly believe, if you look at the science part, right, there's something called as the prefrontal cortex of the brain. Now that is what serves functions of balance, impulse control, planning, organization, goal setting, consequential learning. And I think if that's not yet developed, and along with the neurons that go with the neuroplasticity of the brain, is what leads to maybe also all the other aspects that go with teenage life and pre-adolescence and adolescent problems, right? So that, and the third aspect is the rise in social media, right? I mean, say 10 years back when you said, when school, we never knew of these terminologies.
A little more than 10 years back.
More than 10 years back. We were in class together, and I think that was like, yeah, my God. That's like,
we won't say when, but we can say it was more than 10 years ago.
Yeah. So in those days, I think none of us knew any terminology, right? We didn't even know what depression meant. We didn't know what, like you said, panic attacks were.
Thank God.
We didn't know at all what dyslexia meant or dysgraphia meant. I mean, none of these
We didn't know how to spell it.
We didn't have any clue about OCD. So I think the rise in awareness with movies, with social media, with globalization, I think all that thus has led to an increase in awareness and I think more information dissemination. And I think that's another catch, because many people ask, is there too much of information? Is there too much of an overload of information and too much of labeling, too much of diagnosis? So the answer to that is also yes, because there are teens who walk in to my clinic and they come with their
Self-diagnosed,
diagnosis.
right,
They said,
right.
I have ADHD, I have OCD,
Right,
I think I have depression, and,
Right.
and then I have to break it down for
Right.
them and give them time and a rational explanation as to why yes or why not.
Right.
So yeah.
So how do you, what can, for this podcast, because we're dealing with, children or youth, which is, teenagers or preteens, it's kind of for the parents, but it's also about helping the parents teach the children something also. So when you talk about, these things like instant gratification and resilience, what could parents do and what could we teach our children more?
So I think the most important thing, for not just parents, right? Anyone who deals with youth, it could be educational institutes, it could be parents, it could be caregivers of the youth, and even just any adult, right? Or even youth in the workspace, because that's a huge workforce there too of youth. I think, so all of this, right? No one talks about what you just said, right? Resilience. And according to me, and I mean from what I've experienced, emotional resilience is something so crucial, which is not just the ability to be or have that inner strength, but bounce back and emerge stronger. And I think what we need to allow the youth and children to face is dealing with pain, dealing with hurt, dealing with loss, dealing with failure, disappointment, which lessens that instant gratification. So there's a very comical terminology now used for parenting, which is called snowplowing parenting, which is like, I feel, the worst form, because that's where you want to eradicate any form of difficulty in your child's path. So your kid's AC is not working, it's a calamity. Your child has been pulled up in school or college, and instead of allowing your child to face consequences, parents swarm in and take care. 11 o'clock at night, the child's come to you and said, my homework's not done and my project's incomplete. And we are like donkeys sitting till 12, completing it. So when you take away that obstacles, you don't allow any discomfort, any pain, what's going to happen to this whole generation, right? They don't have resilience. They don't know how to face consequences. There's no learning to deal with stress, to deal with those consequences, to problem solve, conflict resolution. All these, what I call as such important life skills is lost. And then when real life hits, when they do have to face adulting, like I keep telling the youth, there's low frustration tolerance, they can't accept a no, things have to go their way, which is so dangerous, because in life, I've realized
they get very stressed when things don't go their way.
Absolutely. And that's what leads to low frustration tolerance, then the unhealthy coping mechanisms. Then you have a ton of kids, especially young girls, who under emotional duress or stress resort to self-harm or self-cutting and drug abuse, and then the vaping, and then it's like a whole gamut of unhealthy coping mechanisms.
If the core isn't set properly.
Yeah. So to concretize what you asked, parents today, or again, anyone of us, I think there's so much of focus on intellect, IQ, building, education, math, science.
Grades.
And so
university
focused
degrees.
on educating the brain that we forget to educate their hearts. And I think for me, the minute my kids were born, literally, I think for me and my wife, the whole focus was be kind, be gentle, be a good human being first. And I think if that, as parents or as a uniform way of concretizing that comes first, your emotional intelligence, not just your IQ, that has to be prioritized. And you can't do that later when there's a problem and say, oops. I think this has to start being instilled right from literally what I see as birth.
I like that, the building, not only the brain, but the heart as well. So, like you said, be kind, be gentle. Those things are people try to tell their children. But the resilience bit is a little more of a complicated thing. Because the be kind and be gentle is something you're doing to others. Be nice, be a good person. Everybody's like, I'll try to be a good person. But resilience is a bit more because there's a little bit of pain involved in resilience. So how would we teach our children that heart, to make the heart stronger, to make the heart nicer, and to make the heart stronger?
Yeah, so there's no real answer to that. It's a whole series of things again. But I think it goes or segues more into how do you make your child more emotionally intelligent, right?
Right.
So talking about the whole concept of learning from pain, even in that beautiful book, Man's Search for Meaning by Victor, the whole concept there by the psychiatrist also is the learnings from pain, struggle, hurt. That's one. Secondly, teaching...
So reframe pain as a lesson.
A lesson.
A positive lesson, not as something to run away from.
Not at all. And if we look back at all our lives, including ourselves,
for sure,
the worst of things, from loss to pain to failure, now looking back retrospectively, there was some learning to it, right? And
that's the only way you learn, in fact.
But the two biggest pillars of resilience, even from scientific aspects, is the two magic A's, like I call them. It's adaptability and acceptability. Like, say, for example, if I have to explain that to youth, we always joke and say, what happened during COVID, right? The whole world just accepted that COVID was there, that it was dangerous, you couldn't leave your front door, you had to be careful, cautious, all of that. Because there was true acceptance, the whole world almost eerily adapted. We adapted schools online. I mean, I remember we run a school for special needs kids. How do you give occupation therapy, yoga, physiotherapy online? But within a month or two, every teacher, professional, parent on the other side adapted to that situation, right? So teaching them how to adapt to even those difficult times and not, like I said, swooping in and taking away all their problems and failures. And
it's our first instinct saying, no, especially when the child is young. No. And you have to resist that thing and be like, it's a safe environment. It's not that they're crossing the road.
Absolutely.
Let them make a mistake.
Yeah. It's even science. Today, you have babies, you see infants in prams or when they're like little tots. What are parents doing? Constantly wiping their hands, cleaning them with the hand sanitizers. And every pediatrician will also tell you that let them get sick once in a while because that builds immunity. What is immunity? That's strength.
Right.
So if that's medical and science, then the same with the resilience factor from the emotional resilience part.
Right. And you've been practicing for a long time. What do you see are the biggest changes, both positive and negative, in the environment and therefore in the effect that they have on children? Youth.
So like I started off seeing there's so much of external factors that contribute. Vulnerabilities, I think joint families are lesser and lesser, more nuclear families, more couples in marriages that are not happy, and that creates a negative environment sometimes.
Sorry, about joint families. So what happens when there's a joint moves to nuclear? What do you see?
Joint family, I'm not saying joint and nuclear, there's a better or worse.
Got it.
But when I say more nuclear, means there's just the mom, dad, and then the kids, right? So then you have sometimes, even if you want to be more of a hands-on parent, you may not be able to because maybe both parents need to work.
Right.
So I have amazing parents who I work with, but unfortunately for 6 hours or 8 hours, the kid is in a daycare center because they have to work and they don't have then the support of a joint family. So that's one aspect. And then of course, when there's conflict within, for a baby or a kid, their whole world is their family. And when there's some kind of strife or disharmony there, their whole world gets insecure and shattered almost, especially in the event of a divorce or a separation. Then there's also the aspects of digitalization, right? I do feel social media and screen time addictions and excessive audiovisual stimulation does play havoc with mental health. The other contributing factors is, yes, more awareness. And I think there's always there's a surge of wanting to grow up too fast. Now, is that only psychological or emotional, or is that even evolution? Now, when I say or use that word evolution today, we never heard of 9 and 10-year-old girls getting their menstrual periods, for example. Teething is happening faster. Developmental milestones are scaling up faster. Kids at 12 are like, when I talk to them, I have to keep reminding myself I'm talking to a 16-year-old and not a 12-year-old. And my 14-year-old is like going on to 18, So there's more maturity, there's more physical changes that are happening. So
it's like an intelligent intellectual maturity, but like you said, not an emotional maturity. Yeah.
Exactly. So there you see that dissonance.
Yes,
You see
yes.
physically, or those physical changes are all advancing, and
Yes.
yet you know that, like I said, the prefrontal cortex is not developed.
Yes.
And inside, within their brains, are still babies at times. So all of these factors, I think, contribute to more of mental health concerns, issues, or problems.
You said, it reminded me when you said the prefrontal thing again. I would like to talk a little bit more about that.
So the prefrontal cortex is supposed to be like your moral compass, right? So decision making, reasoning, judgment, even social judgment, consequential planning, goal setting, all that is supposed to be the functions of the prefrontal cortex, right? Now, when that's underdeveloped, and they say, years back, research showed that, 18 is you're an adult. And they thought that the prefrontal cortex and the brain was concretized by then. Studies now say it's 25 years, and in fact, even later.
25 and later.
Is when they say the brain has concretized, your learning pathways have fused, there's lesser of neuroplasticity, and the prefrontal cortex is completely developed. Now, when that all is happening in the brain, that gives you a clear answer why teenagers are the way they are. They're like a different breed. That's why the impulse discontrol. That's why the emotional dysregulation. That's why the need for a quick fix. And sometimes there's no future planning, no goal setting, things like that.
They're children. Basically, they're still children.
They're kids.
But we think because they become our height or whatever it is, physically they look... Is that what it's so interesting? Because a 16-year-old could have hair, and everything, or a boy or whatever. And so they look like adult-ish. And we've been trained that 18-year-olds you can drive, vote, and drink in some countries. So you're an adult. So our minds are taught that you're an adult now. You tell the children, now you're an adult. But they're not. They're just babies, big babies basically.
And that's why there's the risk-taking behaviors, the experimentation starts. They're searching for their identity. Most, I would say, teenagers are grappling with complexities like, complex of self-concept. So self-esteem, self-worth, just all those parameters are still what I say is in development. So now when you have all of that from the neurological and the biological and the hormonal aspect, and then you have triggers and external factors, you can imagine then what perhaps could be disastrous. So like simple thing, like when a teenager, breaks up or has their first heartbreak. I mean, we almost like the first thing is we smile because we're like, it's puppy love and you'll get 10 other
For them, it's very real.
But so again, interesting psychology says that how we as adults feel if we were to have a divorce or a separation is as real, painful and hurtful when a teenager has his or her heart broken. So
maybe even more. Because
they don't have then
if you get divorced at 50 or something, it's a terrible thing, but you could be okay with it also because you're like, this is best for us.
So we've had kids, right? We've had kids then, therefore, using unhealthy coping mechanisms, even say, for example, with a trigger like a breakup, we've had kids who've attempted suicide or even died by suicide or just...
Wow. Died by suicide from a breakup.
From a breakup,
like how old?
From a fight. So...
Like how old are the kids?
I'm talking of anywhere between 16, 17 and 18-year-olds.
Wow.
And one thought that suicide was maybe for older teenagers or young adults, but unfortunately the suicide cases are scarily becoming younger and younger.
Right.
I mean, kids as young as even 10 and 11 sometimes have, suicidal ideations and may act on it.
So we'll get into that in a bit on suicide. So, we use words like we said panic attack, ADHD, autism, you said dyslexia, all these words. They're like, dinner table conversations now in many homes. What do you see are the most prevalent ones in your experience?
So from mental health perspective, if you look at it clearly from, mental health disorders or problems, I think the most prevalent today, I mean, just to give you the latest WHO statistics, right? I mean, as we speak, there is one death by suicide every 40 seconds and one suicide attempt every 3 seconds as we speak. And I believe India is the most depressed country in the world right now.
Really?
And these are statistics.
India is the most depressed country in the world. I keep reading some statistic which I find strange that we are one of the happiest countries in the world.
So the incidence and the prevalence is that high with our youth. And even if you look at the other stats, I mean, I don't know them by heart, but the number of suicide cases, depression is very high. So very prevalent, I think, in youth is, of course, depression with stress, anxiety, panic attacks, or even, psychosis and bipolar disorders, OCD. And then, of course, you have a lot of other, aspects that are comorbid with substance abuse, screen time addiction, and things like that.
So if you look at, like you said, I think depression is one of the biggest ones, you said.
Yeah.
I think that's every parent's nightmare, to be, to find out in some way or the other, themselves or their counselor, that your child is depressed.
Yeah.
What are the signs that parents can look for beforehand?
Sure. So that's very interesting because, with kids and with youth, nothing is really direct, right? So, for example, an extremely hyperactive kid or a very overplayful kid or a very restless kid could actually have a diagnosis of ADHD, which is your attention deficit hyperactive disorder. A kid who just suddenly has school refusal as a psychological problem could actually be severely traumatized or bullied or even sexually harassed in school or college. We may feel a kid is just withdrawn and an introvert, but he could be suffering from an actual anxiety disorder, right? So, of course, there are multiple ways to diagnose and understand these things clinically, but I think the most important things, again, not just for parents, but anyone who works with youth or deals with youth, should know that there are very specific clinical warning signs that there could be depression or suicidal ideations. One of them being, the first thing that you see is, this is not my child. So when parents come in and they're not sure what's happening, they typically describe their child or their teenage son or daughter saying, something's changed, right? So there's a clear change or a shift in personality, in behavior, in thoughts, etc. There's a lack and loss of interest in almost everything. So like, stuff like, like sport or wanting to go out and meet friends. There's kind of a social withdrawal.
What they once loved before is now...
Anything that they loved before. Like it could be just even enthusiastic getting up every morning and going to school. In school, there are problems like, like there's more of kind of, again, withdrawn, lack and loss of focus in studies, late submissions, not doing homework, zoning out in class. Interestingly, we also pick up and schools pick up dark content in what they write. It could be a sweet little composition that they've asked to write in school, and any kind of preoccupation with death, suicide, dying, reading up dark content, researching on the internet or social media on suicide or dark content again. Definite changes in sleeping patterns or eating patterns, either the excess of it or the decline of it. Lethargy, again with children and youth, fatigue, tiredness, and very vague kind of medical symptoms like psychosomatic symptoms, as we call it, from stomach aches, headaches, body aches, not feeling good, not feeling well. And I think changes a lot with regards to mood. So a lot of irritability and anger. It doesn't have to be feeling sad and crying all the time, but just mood swings. And most of the times with youth, a lot of anxiety. So, from being completely confident and outgoing, you can see a shift in nature with regards to low self-esteem, low self-confidence, not wanting to try new things. So those are all your typical red flags or warning signs for perhaps depression. So that's why when we see the youth or kids, you don't put a label immediately. You can't, because mental health is linked to your gut health. It's linked to hormones. So we have to do a thorough check-in. You first rule out, do a full blood work. You need to rule out things like vitamin B12 or D3 deficiency, iron deficiency.
To really go into everything.
Have to get into the hormonal work.
Right.
Holistic. Talk to them, spend time with them.
Right. Another thing you talked about with ADHD, there's a joke that, some people say that everybody has ADHD today because, we live in an attention-starved universe. Everybody's span is going down to like milliseconds now.
Yeah.
Forget about children or youth. Adults are sitting on their phone swiping the whole day. So how important is that to diagnose in children or not? Like when does it become a problem? Because to some level, compared to when we were young, everybody has ADHD. I think, would you agree with that?
Again, no labels,
Yeah.
but symptoms of ADHD is becoming so pronounced, as you said, again, because of screen, mobile phones. And I remember reading books and books. I think I can't go through more than 2 pages myself. And I wonder that do I have...
You want to summarize everything.
ADHD
Summarize.
But because of AI, because of social media, phones, and the screens, right? I think all of us have a bit of these symptoms. You're right on that. But so ADHD is something that starts off very young in children, right? So it doesn't say completely start off manifesting with hyperactivity or impulsivity. It can even be sensory issues. Right. So when you actually track back right from birth on, you'll have a kid who's perhaps been restless, a baby being like restless, colicky, irritable, not sleeping at night. So that's like, the history sometimes parents give right from infancy, right?
Did they attach or not properly, blah, blah.
Just like, again, like a difficult baby, as they say, you know? And then through early years, difficulty with even things like fine motor skills, gross motor skills, clumsy, awkward, poor handwriting in class, playful, not sitting in one place for too long, inability to complete given work or assignments, or even, gets frustrated with puzzles. So anything that requires actually sitting, focusing, even visual tracking, kids, parents recall that even just looking in, sustaining your visual tracking is difficult. So those are all your early kind of warning signs, right? Then, of course, it percolates into education and academics, right? Because as the content and the level of difficulty and the expectation increases, then, of course, it starts showing that the typical thing is the feedback from parents and schools is that intellect is here, but output is there. So everyone says you're a bright child, you're intelligent, you speak so well, so proficient in language.
Why are you doing good in school?
Why is it not coming out onto...
It sounds like my report card.
The marks or the grades or the answers.
Yes.
So then you have very short answers, to the point. Like even calculations, math sums will be perfectly correct answers, but all wrong or silly errors along the way with the working. So difficulty with sequential learning or sequencing. So there's a whole way to diagnose. And I think the best way for any child who's above 6 to actually diagnose ADHD is through a psychoeducational evaluation. So these are proper now worldly used standardized tests that are done that will give you the clear indication of ADHD, its symptoms, and how it's also impacting you as a learner. Because very often ADHD has comorbidity with learning disabilities like dyslexia or dysgraphia, or even a processing speed disorder.
And what can happen if you don't assess this, in time? What can happen with ADHD, with depression? I'm just saying, you know what's going to happen with depression and all, but what happens with ADHD?
So one is academic failures, right? So because again, like I said, as the level only increases and the expectation of the child goes up, your grades don't reflect, and sometimes there are actual academic failures where the kid just can't pass or do well. So that's the academic trajectory there. Psychologically and emotionally, obviously, with that comes a lot of low self-confidence and self-esteem. But with ADHD, that gets masked to someone who's just playing the fool. So a kid who's highly impulsive, talkative, like a typical, like the joker of the class, distracting the class.
He's hiding it.
Bloating out. He'd rather be that than showcase some of his difficulties within.
Yes.
And then studies have also shown that untreated or undiagnosed ADHD with teenage life, because then when your hormones kick in and your secondary sexual characteristics develop, you start becoming more and more impulsive. And that's why when you read, actual research on untreated ADHD, you can have run-ins with authority. The impulse control is so high. So a lot of adults and youth who tell me why they've turned to, say, substance abuse or cigarettes or vaping or alcohol is to shut down the mental chatter. So we don't realize that sometimes with ADD or ADHD, it's more the crazy amount of racing thoughts that don't just stop.
They don't know how to stop it. Yes.
So you can even see that in their speech. It's all over the place. There's a fast rate of speech. So ironically, so many parents who come with their kids, then suddenly when we break it all down and understand and diagnose it, the dads or the moms say, oh my God, I think I have the same. So it is also somewhere genetic. And in fact, surprisingly, a lot of dads and moms are also being treated for ADHD when they've come in with their kids.
And on the other side, like you said, these are some signs that are there, but there's some children and teenagers who seem very functional. So I was reading about something called high functioning distress. I don't know if it's a real thing or not, but does that exist?
So there is something called as high functional depression, right?
Yes.
Because you could have someone or youth completely functional, bright, doing well academically, and even keeping a great job, but internally, thought-wise, completely distressed or depressed. So why? I think because also there's a lot of stigma attached to what we go through.
Right.
So, for example, if a kid is being bullied, right? So, I mean, I can completely identify because I went through that in school.
Right.
And you didn't want to share that with anyone. So you start learning to put up fronts, right? And that's where maybe the innate resilience part comes up. You want to mask it, you want to hide it. Then there's also shame and inappropriate guilt. And like I said, there's so much of stigma around mental health and being weak or feeling weak, or the typical aspect, right? That this is all drama. This is, it's a part of being weak. And that whole aspect of being weak is what I think deters youth from either standing up or saying something or voicing something. And that's why even cases of sexual harassment or sexual abuse go hidden or undiagnosed for years because of that shame and the inappropriate guilt.
You talked about bullying in school. We were in the same school. Even I was bullied. And in our school, in those days especially, not blaming our school only, you couldn't tell anyone. It was not even a thing. Like I tell my kids sometimes, that in your school, it's a big thing, of course, now, and correctly so, of course. And when we were young, nobody knew anything, nobody knew what to say. But I remember it impacted me for sure. Like it impacted you for sure. It impacted us, no question. Along with the no question of it impacting us, but the no question that you would tell anyone. So interesting that it was impossible that you tell your parents or your friends. It was your own deep, dark secret, and it was your fault or some rubbish like that. So how do you connect that to resilience? Because that is not helping you build resilience really, or is it? Or so what do you do with that?
So that's where now the more awareness, right? So I really, really feel schools and educational systems, and again, parents need to have difficult conversations with kids. Why are you not talking to children about bullying, ragging, harassment, sexual harassment?
Just talk about everything, basically. Everything should be on the table.
The hard stuff, the dark stuff. Like, yes. I mean, during COVID, I had to tell my kids about suicide and self-harm and, all the stuff. Like even sex education, many parents ask, when do we start that? And my kind of comical answer is when your child starts understanding the English language, right? Yes. But everything has to be disseminated with the accurate information that's age appropriate, so that your child at that age can understand that information. The same with bullying, right? I mean, kids have to know, right, at the earlier ages that the victim is not weak. The bully perhaps is also the victim, because usually kids who like to hurt others or harm others or put others down usually have complexes themselves.
Or they were bullied themselves.
They have bullied, or they have siblings that bullied them at home. Or maybe they're, for whatever reasons, they came from a dysfunctional home, or they had some strife back
They have some issue.
So because of that issue that's unresolved, and then therefore trying to, put in superiority or put someone else down,
that's how they feel better.
Good, and that makes them feel better. And the third component to bullying is the bystanders. So bystanders is a big part of bullying.
Right.
So the bystanders also feel scared, right? So then say they may have a best friend who's bullying someone else, but they don't want to stand up because then it's, being under the radar of siding or not siding your best friend, for example. So schools also need to bring all these up through talks, through workshops, so that right is right and wrong is wrong. And the earlier you teach that to your kid, and also stepwise letting the kid know that if you are going through something like this, what are the steps you need to go through and who you can share this with, how, because you're right, sometimes as parents, if you say, even with me, if I know my kid's being bullied, the first knee-jerk reaction is, let me call up the other parents, let me run to school, let me complain to the counselor or write an email. Sometimes that's disastrous because one is, you've not asked your child, what would you like me to do?
Yes.
How would you like me to help?
They'll be more traumatized.
Yeah, because sometimes kids have complained and stood up for themselves, and it's become worse for them. They've either been ostracized by then the whole group, or they've been silently bullied even more. Yeah. So that's how kids are. Unfortunately, kids are so nasty today that they may put up a front But again, I think more and more and more like-mindedness that gets bred into parenting and school philosophies, it's a win-win then.
True. Like you were saying, talking to the child to understand what they want. So I think almost every parent feels that I just want my child to talk to me. I just want to be a good communicator. But in your experience, how do you create that environment from the parent side and from the children's side that facilitates disclosure, that the child is okay to tell the parent?
So I think what we tend to do, I think as parents, including myself, I mean, I'm guilty of that. The conversations and communication is always either question-based, instruction-based, or then the favorite word of no. And sometimes when, we always joke with moms that if you record your day's conversation with your child, it is 90% all of this, right?
It's conversations, instructions, and no's.
Yeah. Instructions.
Yeah.
And so then where is the conversation, right? It's like, what did you eat? What did you do in school today? What's your homework? Have you studied? Or then if a kid says anything back, it's no, but no. And then, so what starts happening is it becomes very kind of fixated on those themes.
Parent-child dynamic.
Yeah, it's
power
like an
dynamic.
Authoritarian approach which doesn't work at times. So, and if parents, right? So when you talk about why kids don't share sometimes, or there's no disclosure, or there's no easy two-way communication, and this is what kids or teenagers tell me when they have counseling sessions with me, they feel judged. And sometimes we don't realize that in our manner of speaking, we may be judgmental. They feel invalidated. So they don't feel actually understood or heard. So the typical statement that teenagers will always say is, my mom and dad just don't understand what I'm going through, or they don't understand what I'm saying, or neither do they understand what I'm feeling, right? Or this typical preachy way of conversations. It's always preaching, and I think kids hate hearing. And I used to do that too. But when I was young, I did X, Y, Z, and kids hate that. And actually, the reality is so true, because when we were young, say at that generation and this generation, there's such a huge gap, and there's so many things different that they can't relate to that concept of another era, right? So, and the last is fear. So like a kid is lied or made a mistake or failed. And like I said, these are very good learnings also. We sometimes get impulsive and we may raise our voice, we may change our body language, we may have irritability or then even anger or then the dominance of fear. So these factors completely shut down communication or any disclosure naturally. So then the opposite way is conversation, right? So like simple rules, like I know so many families who don't have any meals together. There's no real quality time.
They don't have any meals together.
No, I mean, I clearly know multiple families where they all, like a family of 4, like just mom, dad, and maybe 2 kids, they eat at separate times for whatever reasons, right? I mean, sometimes kids would rather sit on and watch a show on the television because they don't have time, say, for TV or their shows. Dads could come home late from work, mom may be doing something else. So, but simple rules like sitting down on the dining table, because conversations and communication is not just verbal, it's also non-verbal, right? I mean, even I tell parents sometimes, are you even looking at your child? Because body language, is he feeling low? Are you judging that something's off? And that's how conversations and security builds. And I think also for a kid to realize that you're also human. You also make mistakes. You've also gone through a past. You've also been hurt. Showing your vulnerable side, sharing your past stories or your triumphs or your failures makes you more real and relatable. If you are relatable as a parent and accepting, non-judgmental and not invalidating your child, he will clearly or she will clearly be more open.
You have to be a perfect human being.
To be honest, I've shared with my kids about my past, that I was bullied, that I was insecure, that I had anxiety growing up. And I think somewhere that helped my kids relate to me differently. I may have not been the perfect parent initially. I was maybe a bit crabby on stupid things like, chew with your mouth closed, don't put your feet on a sofa. Again, typically how maybe we were brought up at that time, right? You couldn't ask questions.
So you think it doesn't matter about that, about chewing with your mouth closed? And because I don't care about it, but I know some people who do.
I'll come to that. Very
Right.
important question as well. But again, like I said, picking our battles, right? So do you want to be that fun parent or do you want to be that strict parent? Do you want your kid to just completely be who she or he is? So the typical question I love, again, jokingly answer parents is that do you want to be a gardener or do you want to be a carpenter to your child? Right? Do you want to mold him to that so-called perfect ideology of what you have of a child, or do you want to, him and her to flourish the way he wants to? So, but yes, being careful, being respectful, being mindful of others around. So typically, those things in terms of manners for me are very important. Yes. So a little bit of redirection and recorrecting again right from the beginning is important. Like
Judging
your child
is so
should never
hard,
be like a disturbance to others.
Right.
Like, sometimes you have kids who are running around on the aircraft when you're flying. They could be coming and harassing you when you're having a quiet meal, or running around in a restaurant, screaming, shouting.
Of course.
So those things, I think, are the finer things of parenting. And I think they are important.
I also tell my children like all the things that I did in the past. I say it with a sense of humor also. So they know lots about my past. Like I'll just give that example. They know all the crazy stories that my friends have done up and down. They know everything about it. They've not even met my friends. But, we all try, but not judging is so hard. You know what I mean? It's such a hard thing.
Hard. So that,
and not being reactive also.
So you have to have a be present and be mindful approach. So that another thing I was guilty of. Sometimes you're so preoccupied either with work or whatever. It could be your child talking
in
to
your
you,
case with other children.
other kids, emails, responding to work, and sometimes your kid may be talking to you or trying to show you something, and I've realized I'm not even visually maintaining eye contact with the kid, right? So. And it's not quantitative hours. It's not like, I spend 10 hours with my kid. It's qualitative. So even if it's just 15 minutes or 1 hour, we tell parents, be present, be mindful, and steer away from preconceived bias and judgment based on your parenting. Because how we were brought up was maybe not perfect. And I think
either way it was different. The main thing is we should not use that as any indicator of anything.
It's not a benchmark.
Yeah, it's not a benchmark.
Because we were different, our parents were different.
The time was different.
No one gives us a handbook and saying, here, follow these rules and be a perfect parent. And I think parenting has to be individualistic. Because you may have 2 kids, like I have 2 kids. And I think both me and my wife, we parent our kids extremely differently, right? So sometimes you may need to, it depends on the child's unique personality as well.
Okay, small pause. This is the part where I'm supposed to ask you to subscribe. But honestly, only do it if you want more conversations that actually make you think. That's the whole point of the secret sauce. All right, back to it. In all these things, you do tend to look at, like, what does a parent go to? Who does a parent go to for help when something happens? What is the difference between, you said like Empower has 50 different what do you call them?
Therapists, mental health professionals.
So like a psychiatrist, psychologist, a therapist, what is the difference, would you say, between all of them?
So again, that's a great question because many parents get confused, right? So I feel anything that's health related, like say the best way to give you an example is if my kid has a toothache and his tooth has been bothering him for like days, I'm not going to go to my primary pediatrician. I will go to a dentist, right? If my kid has twisted his foot or fractured his arm, I'll go to an orthopedic surgeon. So in the same manner, there are child specialists. So that would come under the category of something like what I would do, which is child, adolescent or family psychiatry, or then a child and adolescent psychologist. So either could be your first starting point, right? Because then
and how do you choose between a psychologist and a psychiatrist?
You may not choose. You may go to either one when you're not sure what you're dealing with. And then either will guide. Like say sometimes I've seen cases and I realize that they may not need to see me regularly.
But what is the difference between both?
So psychiatry, you have to do medical school. So you go through your MBBS and then you have it's like a 10-year journey.
Like being a doctor. It's a doctor.
You have to be a doctor and then you specialize in psychiatry. Yeah. Psychologists, you don't have to do medical school for that. And the main difference is we can prescribe medications and clinically or accurately diagnose something clinical, whereas psychologists do more of the therapy, the counseling, the talk therapy, and things like that. The clinical psychologists, the difference there is they can do the assessments. So they can do, say, projective tests or psychoeducational evaluations to diagnose, say, trauma, depression, anxiety in children or young adults, or rule out any learning disabilities. So a parent can approach anyone in the in the spectrum of a mental health professional who deals with youth. And the difference between the treatment path, like let's say I've seen a kid, right? And like you said, the parent's not sure what he or she is dealing with, maybe a bit reticent, shut down, academics declining. Now say after 1 or 2 sessions, because I always, I'm a firm believer that I hate labeling, right? I mean, labels are for jars, not for human beings, and I tell this to parents, but then if you're dealing with something clinical, like say for example, a kid may have everything going for him. He may have great grades, perfect family. In time you assess that the parenting styles are perfect, socially accepted, having great friends, and yet feeling extremely low, down.
It's a chemical imbalance.
Then it's a neurochemical imbalance, right? So how you would have a vitamin D3 deficiency or low hemoglobin levels or low iron levels when serotonin in the brain, which is a neurochemical responsible for mood, is dysregulated or imbalanced, then it would cause your clinical signs and symptoms of depression or anxiety. And then unfortunately, we have to use medication as part of our treatment. But I think the biggest hurdle there is the stigma. And the stigma is not just, I'm going to a psychiatrist, because I think that's slowly changing nowadays. I mean, it was like so comical because years back when I started, people would run away when they saw me. They didn't want to be seen with me.
They didn't run away, but I remember it was a big thing.
It was a big thing.
It was like a new thing.
Now it's a reverse. Some of the smarty pants kids come and say, hey, meet my shrink and things like that. So it's nice to see that change.
Like an American movie, basically. I just got off the phone with my shrink.
So they almost love the labels and the diagnostics and all of that. And I think I'm a pretty cool shrink, so that's a plus for them.
For sure.
Just joking.
And
so that's the difference, right? And I think parents, their stigma is, if I go to a psychiatrist or a mental health professional, my child will be labeled, he'll be diagnosed, and he'll be put on medication. And then the medications, are they lifelong? Will they cause side effects? Will they cause weight gain? I don't want my kid to feel or be like a zombie or extremely sedated. But it's so scientific, and now medical sciences has been so efficient that you have really intelligently smart medication that's side effect free, that's not lifelong, but can actually treat disorders like clinical depression or panic attacks and anxiety or OCD or even psychosis and things like that.
With no side effects?
Every drug has side effects. The worst ones are paracetamol, or if you read like Augmentin, I don't know if as babies our kids were always put on Augmentin for their coughs and colds. Those are far more damaging to the liver and kidney. These, don't forget, are created for long-term use because you can't treat, like I can treat a cough and a cold with an antibiotic course for 5 days. But if I'm treating clinical depression, it has to be a minimum of 6 to 9 months. So keeping that in mind, pharmacy has evolved in making sure there are no long-term side effects. Of course, if you take them at very high doses or excessively long timelines, then it will have effects.
We talked about instant gratification. I think a mirror of instant gratification is boredom. I remember being bored out of my brain as a kid. For days, when we had holidays, you're just sitting, you had a book to read or nothing, looking out of my window in the garden, looking at spiders, eggs, like whatever random stuff you had to do because you had nothing to do. You must have to remember that. How good or bad or important is boredom for a growing child?
Very important. And unfortunately, it's so sad when I see this generation or their youth, there is no boredom. They don't know what to do with their so-called free time. And boredom is not really boredom. When you actually look at boredom and mindfulness, it's one and the same thing. Because when you're overstimulated, today kids or youth have too many choices. Like even food, right? You don't want to have this. You have banana, you have
course,
eggs, you have
yes.
toast. I mean, we're giving our kids like too many
Zomato.
choices. And even dating, I always joke with teenagers, like even your dating apps is like choosing something off a menu, right? And so with too many choices and all these changes is what leads to these frustrations. So coming back to that, yes, being mindful, being present, not overstimulated, not being rushed from one class to another, whether it's academics or a game of tennis or football. Kids need downtime or time to be doing nothing. And there's a reason for that. They say brain assimilates information better. Storage of information that you process auditorily or visually into short-term memory and long-term memory gets better. So therefore, recall of information is smarter. Then you have learning for life. And your child becomes more, I would say, centered and grounded. So,
and when you say doing nothing, you mean what? Just like sit at home, no screen, take away the
no screen, no class, no tuition, no flipping off the phone. Just like you rightly said, sometimes where do kids sit and stare? Now, I mean, we come from a different generation. Like I would love staring at trees, like nature. Today, kids don't know what's nature, what's so big in a tree. Like sometimes my kids make fun of me because if I've spotted a beautiful tree or a beautiful mountain, I'm saying, hey, look at that. And they're like, what's wrong with me?
Why the sky, I do it all the time in the sky. Look at that beautiful, they all make
sky,
the
sunsets.
Moon, the sunsets, yes.
People make fun of me because sometimes the same angle, the same sunsets, I will go on taking pictures because for me, it's different and different colors each time. So unfortunately, the youth doesn't or hasn't received that. And I think, again, inculcating that at a young age and stage of life, very important for the brain. It also stimulates a lot of creativity, no? Creativity comes from the mind. It comes from within.
I always say it comes from boredom. When you're bored out of your brains, when you cross that threshold of literally out of your brains, then your mind will go into doing something. If you're hectic the whole day, how are you going to create something basically?
Even multitasking. I mean, everyone talks about how amazing multitasking is. They say it's almost like a fuse box that fuses. That's what multitasking sometimes does to the brain. So even doing one thing at a time mindfully, but being absolutely present is sometimes better than doing 10 things at one go.
Probably always better. You talked about dating apps. I'd like to know that what ages do kids use dating apps nowadays and how does that work?
So of course, I mean, again, dating apps, I think is usually over 18. Do kids even as young as 17 and 18 go on to wrong sites, dating apps, pornography? The answer is unfortunately yes.
Right.
And I think that's again because there are no checks and balances when we put a smartphone into our kids' hand. I mean, the years back, I remember the school that we run for kids with who are neurodivergent. We had a 7th grader who started manifesting with sexually inappropriate play. Like, he was making certain adult-like gestures. He was trying to kiss girls and boys inappropriately, touching them inappropriately, just odd sexual manifestations. And then we realized every single night he was on his smartphone till 2 a.m. watching actual hardcore pornography. Wow. And the parents were clueless, and this went on for about 2 months.
Wow.
So now obviously he was just...
What year he was?
Grade 7.
Wow.
So it's damaging, right? Because any content that a child watches that is not age appropriate, it could be something aggressive, it could be something horrible. Like, you have all sorts of very negative videos out there and pop-ups that come up even between games, unfortunately. So one must again have these very important talks to our kids that if you have anything that pops up that's inappropriate, let us know. But it damages a lot of way of thought psychologically and emotionally as you develop and grow.
Yeah, like you spoke about porn. I was reading somewhere that the age at which children are exposed to porn reduces every year because everybody's on their screens the whole time. So can you just tell me what ages do you see this kind of thing happening and what happens to a child's mind when they watch porn for the first time?
So, of course, see, pornography is not normalcy, right? It's clearly, so what we tell kids also, it's like how you make a movie. It's artificial, it's not realistic. And unfortunately, children or then youth or teenagers who watch too much of it or who even get addicted to it, they've normalized something that's abnormal. Like simple things like, and then there's self-consciousness, because obviously when it is time for actual lovemaking or intimacy or sexual intercourse, you have young adults coming and telling me that they can't perform, they can't sustain their erections for an hour, and ridiculous myths that they grow up believing in. And that's when we realize, or then unfortunately, too much of exposure also leads to very kind of compulsive or addictive masturbation. So they get so used to that pleasure seeking, and the dopamine gets so stuck with that normal intimacy, normal love making, and all the other aspects get completely derailed, and they get confused. And that's when they come to us to seek help. And that's when we realize that it's because of early normalization of what's not normal.
How do you, because no child is going to tell you, I mean, it's going to be tough for a child to tell you that, yeah, I've been watching porn. How does that happen? How does that conversation happen?
So like I said, we have to have difficult conversations and realistic ones across all age groups. So telling kids that there are some adult videos and they're called adult because they're not age appropriate. It's not normal what you watch on it. It's not appropriate. And as parents, we don't accept it. And it's not something that you need to do at all. And it's also, we have to realize the risks there. It's not just pornography. It's also chatting with strangers. You may be even playing a harmless game, and so many games you're playing with kids from around the world.
Of course.
Letting them know that the other kid on the other side may not be a kid, and how sometimes adults can even hurt kids. Or then you have this concept of grooming, right?
Yep.
Which is chatting and befriending and then asking you certain sexual or kind of explicit information, not sharing of photographs, how you can misuse social media or the internet, how you can morph photographs. Unfortunately, we have to tell our kids all these things to keep them safe. And I think when you do that, we've seen a lot of kids become more responsible when they use their phones and their screens. So a lot of kids more responsible. So when they have then come across, like say, like recently also, like a regular game on your phone, and then suddenly the game will stop and you'll have some extremely inappropriate advert for kind of a semi-pornography movie, for example, and things like that. And those are not a random message, again, when a kid is gaming that may be sexual in nature. So all these things need to be told that the minute you experience something like this, you need to let us know as adults or parents.
And what should parents not do if their child tells them that, oh, I saw this or whatever? Or my friend showed me some
conversation. See, the thing is, the first impact, right? So again, body language. So when we, get uncomfortable ourselves, or we, like some parents just can't have these difficult conversations. They feel awkward, they feel shy, they feel guilty, or they feel, okay, this is something I can't talk to you about.
I didn't sign up for this.
This is not something I can share with you, or this is not for your age. Now, the minute you shut down, it's human to be more curious. So the minute you don't normalize these conversations, your kid is then obviously going to go to Google and ChatGPT and all the other ways of researching things which may not be accurate or age appropriate or normal. And that's what we tell parents, that you have to start having these difficult conversations with our kids age appropriately. So whether it's even, like I have parents who say, you know what, I've never talked to my kid about death. I've never taken him or her to a funeral. And I feel that's absolutely not okay, because then, I feel death is part of life and inevitable for each one of us. And if you don't normalize that too, and explain to a kid like you would explain the life cycle of anything living, a kid can be extremely traumatized or shocked when they hear of death or have a loved one that passes. And that's why I think over years there are funerals and there are processes that every family follows to have that closure, So it is important to have these difficult conversations.
Got it. What do you feel about that ban that they are, Australia did it, Europe is looking at it, under 16-year-old social media ban?
I think it's extremely healthy, because you just think, why would a 12 or a 13-year-old need to be on social media? Why would you want to put up information, photographs, personal anecdotes all the time? it's not necessary.
It's
right?
not natural.
Again, it's not even natural. And you're actually encouraging and normalizing then children at a young age to live in a virtual world. And when you are, and unfortunately, COVID did that, right? I mean, COVID was the starting point of everyone becoming more on their, I mean, the world became virtual. We had to at that time. But that started triggering off a lot of what I call as social anxiety and social awkwardness. So, you sometimes see kids when they're online or they're chatting or you read their messages or their profiles, you wonder like, wow, this is like a cool, smart, outgoing kid.
Yeah.
And then they will also tell you, but then they're not like that at all in real life.
Yes.
And that's the biggest, I would say, impediment, because they become so much more comfortable behind the screen that there's a lot of low self-confidence, low self-esteem, social awkwardness, oddities when it comes to actual face-to-face interactions.
Like, what is the craziest situation of someone addicted to screens?
Oh my, there's so many, where kids who become so addictive, and when I say kids, I'm talking of 6th, 7th, 8th graders, where their phone doesn't even physically leave them. So the parents come in saying the phone has to be in their hand. It's the first thing they touch or hold when they've woken up or before sleeping at night. You dare touch it, you dare take it away, because you always, from a safety point of view, you don't want the phone next to you when your child is sleeping and things like that. They will refuse for that. And the minute there is the screen put down, there's a clear, distinct irritability, mood swings, agitation, restlessness, a few ADHD kind of symptoms that prop up and remain consistently after. And I would say cognitive dulling. And like you said, they don't know what to do without that screen. So like how you would take away alcohol or drugs and you get those withdrawal symptoms, and kids being kids, and like we discussed, they have anyways low frustration tolerances and a poor impulse, they become actually superbly intolerant and extremely aggressive. Like recently we had a father whose ribs were fractured because they got into a physical struggle with their child. So kids can get actually aggressive and violent to kind of snatch back that phone. You've had the worst meltdowns and tantrums where kids have been vengeful because their parents have put their foot down and locked away the phone. Kids have found devious ways to kind of break into their parents' cupboards, actually sometimes physically broken down doors, and got violent to get, like how a drug addict,
like an addict
would behave,
And you talked about drug addict, you talked about marijuana, for example, and I want to talk about that. So, but just you give this example of someone's ribs got fractured, a parent's ribs got fractured. How would you compare screen addiction versus drug addiction? Because when we were growing up, it was drug addiction. Today, you have screen addiction as well as drug addiction.
So addiction per se is on the rise, because I think it's by nature we've all become more addictive. I think what we don't really realize, unfortunately, the normalization when marijuana came in was that it's safe, it's organic, it's not addictive, it doesn't have long-term side effects. I mean, it was obviously known that cocaine and heroin were the bad ones, and lifelong
You mean the
addiction.
whole new thing in edibles and all, like in America and all? They've legalized it in the West, basically.
Which is crazy according to me, because so many parts of the world you see shops. I mean, in Phuket you have multiple shops that sell all of this anyway. What we have clearly seen as a team in the last 10 to 15 years, that it is literally like slow death to the brain, if I may say that sentence, because it causes an acute amount of cognitive decline, very slow or low processing speeds, dullness, symptoms of ADD, like I said, very limited attention, focus and concentration. It's like literally something called as a amotivational or demotivational syndrome. You literally, in layman's terms, become like a zombie. You can't function. Kids who've been straight A-star students, there's a clear decline with their academics, with their marks, with their output. You even see a change in their body language. You actually have slowing down, right? And that's because kids don't realize that when you have any substance, it clearly imbalances dopamine in the brain. It's not like you get that dopamine rush and then the dopamine comes back. It starts getting more and more imbalanced. And that's why even if you read up actual medical research, you have marijuana-induced psychosis, which is having frank hallucinations and delusions. We had a kid after a bad hit tried to leap out in anger from his 11th floor window, and the way the parent
Bad hit
described,
of marijuana.
yeah, he had become psychotic post the marijuana usage, and he mixed it with alcohol.
Got it.
And I think there was an altercation again because of that, but so impulsive and so not in touch with reality that he tried to lunge out from the 11th floor, and the parents said that they had to haul him back from his ankles. That's how far the reach was. So we tell parents that, again, there are clear risk factors, right? You know that something's off or something's changing, and the only way to know is to get a urine test done. And those are 100% accurate, and you get like a proper 9 or 11 drug panel test, and you'll clearly know which drug has been abused and for how long and what the levels are in the urine.
But the question here would be, if someone thinks their teenage kid is smoking up, how do they get them to do the urine test without breaking their trust completely?
I think in matters like this, there's no trust, because the minute you, again, go gently on that, you're giving them the notion perhaps, and unfortunately you have so many, sorry to say this, but idiotic parents who will also feel it's okay, you know. And I've had arguments with so many dads because they think that no tobacco, no smoking and no alcohol, but I think the weed is okay.
Right.
And I'm like, please no, you know.
Like you said, marijuana is so prevalent now. You're a 16-year-old kid. You're with your friends. Someone or the other older kid is, having it, and they're laughing, and it looks like they're having a blast. They're eating pizza at night, whatever, all that stuff is going on. What does the kid do? How does the kid learn to say no, or balance it out, or say, I'm going to have a little, I don't know. What does the kid do?
So again, the instilling part, you can't suddenly talk to your kid about marijuana when he starts going out with his friends for the first time, because by then that it's a novelty, right? I mean, and as you rightly said, peer pressure is so high, and peer influence for them, they want it's very high, because you want to fit in desperately.
That's your life.
And that's your life. So to answer your question, very hard. But now, if from early on, I've instilled, told kids facts, given them short videos, anything to learn, and with a bit of fear, which is the good fear part as to what the consequences could be. I have a load of smart enough kids who put their foot down and say, sorry, I don't do this.
You have that?
Yes. And it's lovely to see, because
they don't have it at all, or they say, I'll have a little bit, but I won't get
They will not want to try because they don't want to.
Right. So, do you recommend that everybody, who can afford it time-wise and otherwise, have this spree where once a week or once a month the child has someone who they can talk to?
So I highly advocate for that, and that's why during COVID times when mental health had really reached its limits, we created a mental health curriculum for schools. So we said, let's bring the counselor and the psychologist into the classrooms. Let's bring mental health and these conversations into the classrooms, starting from grades 1 to grades 12. It was a crazy journey because most schools rejected the idea. IB schools and IGCSE schools that had so much of other extra allied classes and co-curriculars and TOIs and all the other things that go with the curriculum kept saying we don't have time because it was a rigid program. It's I would say to them in Zoom meetings that it's okay to have one less math class or science class, but do this just once a week.
During COVID, that too.
Yeah, and we had created it beautifully where, say, for example, you talk about depression to a first grader and a 12th grader, but obviously when you talk to a first grader about depression, you're using different words, terminologies for them to be able to relate to depression, and 12th standard, a different ball game, right? So when you're doing this, so what are you doing? You're definitely teaching life skills. You're bringing up the awareness factor. You're bringing down the social stigma, the taboo. The counselor is not like a bad word and a bad person. You're allowing the counselor to engage regularly and be seen and be heard by the same person. So what is therapy? What's counseling? It's not just dealing with an illness. It's also, like you said, positive psychology is huge. It's prevention. It's advocacy. It's awareness. Like, think about it. Did we even imagine that someone would tell us or teach us how to manage our thoughts? Now, according to me, when you look at CBT, which is cognitive behavior therapy, the premise of that is thought management. And I always joke, what is depression? What is anxiety? What is stress? It's thoughts.
Of course.
It all starts from thoughts.
Yes.
But where
And patterns that we've developed
Yeah.
to say the same negative
and
thing
certain
again and again.
bad thoughts or negative thoughts can be like bad habits,
Yes.
right? They become almost subconscious and then unconscious and all of that. So all this has to start with the cohesiveness of parents. Schools play a big role, according to me, with regards to the mental health of our youth, and instilling and normalizing this way earlier on, so that, again, the word is normalization, acceptance, awareness. I mean, so to your first question, now you talk to any second or third grader also, they'll know what a panic attack is because it's been spoken about. They will know what depression is. They will know the consequences of marijuana if they are in grade 9 and 10, or vaping, for example, and how carcinogenic it can get. So these are the amazing changes that we would want to further, inspire into schools and institutes, and hopefully there will be a change.
You spoke about bullying. How prevalent, because schools are trying to be more careful compared to when we were, let's start again. We both admitted out here that we both were bullied in school. Schools are much more aware of it now, for sure. But how prevalent is bullying still today, both offline and online? And what do you see with bullying?
So I think at some point, and this is scary to say, but every kid in some way or the other is being bullied, because bullying is not just what you see and hear in movies or the pushing and the abusing. It's the silent treatment, it's the whispering, it's the ostracization, it's just nasty comments on the way a kid may look. I have kids who've been bullied on the kind of homes they come from, kids who are bullied on what their parents do, which car drops them off at school, the skin color, race, religion. I mean, the discrimination is endless, right? So to answer how prevalent it is, at some point, whether it's body shaming, cyberbullying, a bit of sexual harassment, it's prevalent with every kid. Like every kid at some point is going to experience it. And from the parent point of view, obviously, when it comes to our child, we have a knee-jerk response. And like we discussed, the first thing we do is you want to call up and either yell at the kid or then complain to the parent, which is the snowball effect in the reverse. You can have your kid being further ostracized, further bullied, all of that.
So what should be, if you find that your kid comes home and says, I've been bullied really badly in school, what should you do and what should you never do?
So the first thing is listen. We tell parents active listening, because sometimes the anger is so high, or the feeling,
we're just reacting,
empathy, we become reactive, and then so the two magic R words, respond, don't react, respond, don't react. So we have to keep telling ourselves even internally, right? Second is mindful conversation, right? Be an active listener, don't be judgmental, don't put the other kid down, don't have any kind of comments, suggestions. Very important to hear your kid out completely, understand, because sometimes a kid could be manipulative, could have started things first, or a fight first, or a comment first, and then it snowballs into an active fight. So get the information accurately, which a lot of parents sometimes don't do. Ask your child what you would like me to do. And not just that open-ended question, but telling them that I can do X, Y, Z. So then giving them alternatives, that would you like to speak to your friend? Sometimes we type out a draft of a message that you would like your child to send to the bully to clear out the air, or give certain consequences in place. That may help. You may suggest a confidential meeting with the school counselor or the principal, or then encouraging the child to speak directly to the school counselor if he or she has a good rapport.
Right.
So then that way what you're doing is you're not letting your kid feel, oh my God, I'm stuck, it's going to get worse, nothing will help, nothing will change. That's the real worst feeling, where a kid feels completely cornered and helpless, that there won't be any kind of consequence or respite.
We looked at so many issues that children face. And of course, there's a big difference between what girls face and what boys face. I just want to ask you want to tell me a little bit about that? Like if I have if you have a daughter or a son, what do you look out for more? Because they have such different experiences. We try not to, but they have such different experiences growing up.
So interesting question, but I don't know about statistics and what's globally prevalent or not. But what I see in my last 25 years of practice is more commonly in girls is the unkindness, the bullying, the groupism, the silent games and dynamics that go on with them. And that sometimes leads to a lot of emotional distress, anxiety attacks in classrooms. And unfortunately, then when there's maybe no respite to their emotional needs, we've seen a very high increase in self-harm.
Oh, okay.
And that is extremely troubling for us to also witness, because sometimes, like I'll give you a case of a surprisingly, like you said, kids put on a mask, a strong front. This girl in grade 11 was trying to assess me through 2-3 sessions that we already had as to whether I'll keep things confidential, tell her mom everything.
Got it.
She asked for this meeting and I was not sure why she reached out. But so sad, she shared eventually her journey of being bullied, ostracized, body shamed and all of that. And unfortunately, she was also battling sexuality-based issues, because I think by grade 9, she realized that she had a different sexuality to the norm.
Right.
And I think she may have shared this with her best friend who
wow.
snitched on her, and you know how it unfolds then.
Right.
So to work on her emotional self, she started finding sharp new blades that she would buy from a chemist. She learned online how to sterilize them, clean them, how to even clean the wound. She bought antiseptic creams, and then she sheepishly pulled up her shorts, and there were about 50 to 60 old scars of self-harm on her upper thigh.
Right.
So that's just one example or one window into how kids and teenagers and the youth suffer silently like this, right? Now, the approach to this, one was the whole bullying. But, you know, a lot of parents want a quick fix. A lot of schools want a quick fix. In mental health, we always say there's no quick fix. Like I said, parenting is a journey, so is healing, right? A wound doesn't heal overnight as well, right? And imagine psychological scars or emotional baggage can sometimes take years to offload or balance back or heal. We have to have the mindfulness of a multidisciplinary approach. So in anything in health today, you can't say, I'll treat my cough and cold with an antibiotic, right? You'll have hot water, you'll have your ginger and honey. Why? Because you're thinking of a holistic approach. It's the same with our youth. It cannot just be one way or only therapy or only medication. It has to have a holistic approach and life skill approach. So things like grounding, breathing techniques, meditation, being with nature, animal-assisted pet therapy, music therapy, nutrition, because there's a clear gut-brain axis that plays its part in mental health, diet, exercise, right? I mean, even just rigorous dancing, jogging, running, walking, all that releases your good hormones or your endorphins and can actually reset and rebalance the serotonin and dopamine levels in the brain. All of this has to come together. Now, who puts it all together? It's not just me as a professional, it's family work. So I truly believe, and that's why sometimes I call myself a family psychiatrist, because you can't only work with the kid and not let the parents know anything.
It takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah.
When a child, teenager tells you something that's confidential but very dangerous, like self-harm or some drug addiction or something, what do you do after that?
So confidentiality is what we lay down first, right? So in our initial conversations with youth, children, even adults, we talk about confidentiality very directly, and when we need to breach it as professionals. And the usual aspect here is, if you're at risk for anything that's going to harm you, health-wise, mental health-wise, through drugs, through suicide attempts, or even feeling actively suicidal or self-harm, unfortunately, we have to breach that confidentiality. And before doing that also, we will let the child know that we need to do this. Second is, we sometimes assess. Now, if it's a one-off self-harm, which is not even broken the skin or just like a scratch or ideologies, we kind of still work with the kid to see how resolution happens and whether it's emotional and because of something else that can be worked on, or is it then something neurochemical or more than what we see. Then I use another strategy where I bring the parents into confidence. So the kid sometimes still feels that there is confidentiality respected, and the parents are also told.
That's the best way, right?
I feel that works because I don't believe that parents need to be left in the dark. That's the most dangerous thing you can do, because sometimes we've had cases, not in our center, but I've heard that the teenager has had clear red flags, warning signs, suicidal ideations, and finally died by suicide, and the parents never knew all
Because
that was going on.
Confidentiality thing, right? How prevalent is toxic masculinity and misogyny in our youth today?
I wouldn't say it's very common, but it's very prevalent.
What's the difference?
So prevalent in subtle ways.
I
Like,
see.
you have sometimes you may have a patriarchal family.
It's like insidious. It's just bubbling
it's
around.
Like, it's just a known thing.
Yeah.
The fathers are known to earn.
Yes, yes.
Dads have to get you.
The son will get the food first. The daughter will blah blah blah.
I mean, in some homes, the
Inheritance.
The housewife will have to serve the husband when he comes home late from work. Now, sometimes it's cultural, sometimes it's familial. So I can't be judgmental on that. But by nature of our society, there is more importance given to the male, right? And toxic masculinity also has its, I think, correlation with what you see on social media and all the jokers online who put down women or who have a lot of derogative words and terminologies. So racism, sexism, gender bias, body bias, these things are very prevalent with our youth, and it starts unfortunately from school. So when we discuss about bullying, it's also being mindful about using the right words and the right terminologies, because it starts off with things like, I've had kids who've been bullied on the color of their skin. I've had kids who've been bullied because they are, like, say, boys are slightly effeminate. Like, how can boys cry? How can boys wear a pink shirt? How can boys be creative, right? I mean, those are those typical,
very old tropes,
standard aspects that haven't left us. They still exist, So teaching our kids that, I'm not saying women are a weaker race, but the respect for women, small nuances, like we discussed about manners. Like today, when you're in a mall, no one really holds a door for you. It's just slamming back on your face. So I feel today kids learn best with role models and role modeling. So if we also make those alterations, and like I said, the journey starts within, we are aware of our own judgments and biases and make the alteration and do it subtly without sounding preachy to our kids and be those effective role models, is when you can really make that change.
Today, the kids on social media have repeated exposure to unrealistic bodies, skins, lifestyles. How does this affect their self-image, and what can parents do, to make it better without just having a war saying don't use the screen?
So I think, yes, because of exposure, movies, adverts, social media, the concept of beauty, the concept of how a body should look, male or female, the concept of beauty products to beautify your skin or lighten your skin. I mean, all these things are, even my 9 and 10-year-old will know, these products. They call like Sephora kids, right? That's the term sometimes they used in a playful way. Always, again, instilling right in the beginning that beauty comes from within. It's more the kindness, the gentleness, the emotional intelligence, and how you are from within that actually makes you beautiful. And that concept, so sometimes there are physical differences, even sometimes between two siblings, right? So again, the mindful, intuitive parenting to give those little praises and affirmations and parents sometimes get so caught up in life that they forget, right? It's not like a conscious thing that they do, but when they understand that, say, a kid is complex about his or her skin color, or sometimes it could be as silly as I hate my hair, or allowing subtle changes, age-appropriate changes. Like there's no harm in, say, your kid getting a blow dry before a birthday party if she wants, right? Without making a big deal of it. But at the same time, saying or complimenting your child on a particular attribute that he or she is uncomfortable with, And subtly, like you're going out and has come out of his room or her room dressed.
How beautiful you look.
You're looking amazing. Yeah. Like when my daughter needed glasses, right? We all made a big thing of it. Come on, let's get 5 colors and how cool they looked. We overdid it so much that my son, who didn't have glasses, also wanted glasses, So
when I was young and I got specs, my mom was shattered, poor thing.
But it's
He's upset to hear this.
I know. It's the same thing. It's with all of
It was
us.
like the world had ended basically. How could Mukul get glasses? Nobody has glasses. It's like, so after 25 years of practice, Dr. Zirak Marker, what has been the hardest part of this profession for you?
So it's hard initially. I think it's difficult to just cut off from work. So obviously the first time you start practicing and you hear of someone attempting suicide or harming himself or herself, or the horrible stories you hear, you but naturally get emotionally disturbed or upset yourself. And it takes, I think, a lot of time, effort and introspection and self-work to understand boundaries, right? And work-life balance and not let it really affect you, right? So that's a journey that takes time. And I think I've overcome that, thankfully, because I think it also helps you evolve. And that's the lovely part about the work we do. And I think that's for all of us as mental health professionals. It's an inward journey. And we actually tell sometimes amazing clients and families and kids that we learn so much from you, right? And it's not a quick fix. And like I said, I know some kids who've come to me and I've worked with them and their families for like 10 years, 15 years. And I feel old because sometimes the kids I've worked with are now fathers or parents and they've got kids themselves. So the hard part is, and I'm going to be candid and share that it's happened twice to me over these 24 years where, you've worked, you've given your heart and soul, you've made that positive impact, you've turned around the depression or the drug abuse has stopped or the alcoholism is no more. And then suddenly there's a week or two where the client actually seems to be healing, getting better, feeling lighter, and you get a phone call saying they've ended their life.
Jesus.
So for me, I've had 2 such cases and they've been quite devastating because it's not like a surgeon on the table where you've seen that patient for just 10 minutes and had a consult for 20 minutes and you're covered under a bed sheet, right? So
it's a child. I mean, a youth,
young adult,
and who you spend years with.
Yeah. So
personally, with a deep relationship.
You start then obviously spiraling into, have I done enough? Should I have done something differently? Could I have done something different or said something different? Or why couldn't I pick up those last warning signs? Or were there any warning signs? And all those things cloud your judgment, your self-confidence as a professional. So when that happened, I think the best thing I did was actually talk about it to other professionals here and abroad. And there are support groups for us too as well. And you realize that the actual part about sometimes depression that culminates into suicide, no one can ever stop it because you never really know. And there is an actual clinical period where there's an assumption that your client or your family member is getting better, but that's because they've come to terms that they've planned to end their life. So they actually feel more light, more relieved, more kind of okay, but that's because they're okay with the inevitability.
Their suffering is ending. Wow, that's crazy. Yeah. Last question. Could you share a story about hope, about a case which was impossible? Like when the case came to you, it was horrific, but it's all good now.
So that I can say is for multiple cases.
Of course.
I can't really think of one case or one individual, but there are 2-3 cases where life has been impossible for them because it's not just the clinical part or the clinical depression. I'm talking about real awful things that you wouldn't imagine on someone, from even say going through cancer, going through both parents dying off during the terrorist attacks.
Whoa.
This girl that I talked about being completely burnt, and she was engaged, and because of her full body burnt, there was just 10 surgeries down, and she said, I hate the way I look, the way that I smell, I can't bear to see myself in the mirror. When you see such strife, and then through your work and therapy or medication in this holistic way, you see hope, you see respite, you see that same girl who's gone through the 14th surgery but smiling in front of you, or a message that comes on your phone with gratitude and gratefulness for just being heard, understood, and helped. So for me, those are the wins, because I think also with age, time, and practice, I think I've realized my purpose to life also I discovered through the work I do, which is touching people's lives. And coming to terms also with the 2 losses I've had and all these amazing things. I feel if you make a difference even in one life or with one person, your day is made. So I look at it optimistically that way. So there's no one case, but there are multiple beautiful people like that who've taught us to be emotionally resilient ourselves.
Right. If parents listening could remember only one thing from this conversation, what would it be?
I tell this to all parents. In fact, why parents? Any adult. The minute you know that something is not okay, it could be an intuition, because many parents retrospectively feel, I thought something was wrong, but I wish I could have done this and I wish I could have said that. And then there's a lifelong, guilt or regret. I tell every human being that the minute you know that something's amiss, something's not okay, intuitively feeling that your gut is telling you that something's not okay with any loved one, your child, your spouse, your loved one, seek help. Why not? Like again, I always joke that are you going to let your kid suffer with that toothache for 10 days? The answer is no. You'll probably run and get the appointment the next hour. Or you're not going to sit on a fracture for 3 days either. You're going to get the plastering or the surgery immediately. So why wait for this? We're not scary as shrinks. We will not over-medicate and over-diagnose. And there will be a holistic, mindful, intuitive approach in the therapeutic process. So don't wait, because by waiting, by procrastinating, and that's another interesting WHO statistic, worldwide, by the time there's the onset of symptoms and the time you seek help, what do you think is the gap in time? Take a guess.
A year.
8 to 10 years.
Wow, 10 years, yeah. I can imagine, you're right, because if it's personal, like it'll be fine. And is it for kids also? This is the total number.
The onset of most, if not all, mental health illnesses start through childhood, no? They start at 9, 10, 15 years of age. And that's why learning disabilities, neurodivergence, and sometimes even most of your mental health illnesses are considered like, sometimes they're called hidden disabilities or hidden problems.
So like if an adult has a generalized anxiety disorder or something, there would be some signs when they were young that were missed.
In fact, I would say 90% of adults I work with who are going through anxiety disorder, for example, they will very clearly be able to tell you that it perhaps started in school.
And went up and down, but it was there kind of.
Life happens, right? And then you also devise your own coping mechanisms, but it actually never really goes away if it's something clinical.
Got it. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.